The December wind howled through Desert Springs like a wounded animal, carrying with it the bite of winter that made even the hardiest cowboys seek shelter. Snow dusted the red rocks surrounding the small Arizona town, creating a stark contrast against the desert landscape. Inside the modest library, Eleanor Rose Hartwell pulled her olive-green shawl tighter around her shoulders, careful to keep the long sleeves of her brown wool dress covering her arms completely. At 28, Elena had learned to make herself invisible. Her dark chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple low bun, and she moved between the wooden shelves with practiced silence, organizing the few dozen books that comprised Desert Springs' entire literary collection. The library was her sanctuary, a place where she could lose herself in other people's stories and forget, for brief moments, the scars that marked both her body and soul. The brass bell above the door chimed, and Eleanor instinctively turned away from the entrance, busying herself with a stack of books. Heavy footsteps approached, accompanied by the distinctive jingle of spurs. "Miss Hartwell?" The deep, measured voice belonged to Sheriff Thomas Sullivan. Elena had seen him around town during her 6 months in Desert Springs, but they'd never spoken directly. She kept her face turned toward the shelves, her heart inexplicably quickening. "Yes, Sheriff," she replied softly, not turning around. Tom removed his dark brown hat, running weathered fingers through hair that showed premature silver at the temples. At 32, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd learned to read situations quickly and act with deliberation. His blue-gray eyes, usually calm as still water, held a troubled expression. "I'm afraid I need to ask you some questions, ma'am. There's been an accusation made against you." Elena's hands stilled on the book spine she'd been adjusting. "What kind of accusation?" "Samuel Whitmore claims that money went missing from his coat pocket yesterday evening during the church social. He says you were the only person near the coat room when it happened." Finally, Elena turned to face him, her dark green eyes meeting his briefly before dropping to the floor. Tom noticed how she kept her right arm positioned behind her, hidden from his view. "I didn't take anything, Sheriff," she said quietly. "I barely spoke to anyone at the social." Tom studied her face. The gentle curve of her cheek marked by a few scattered freckles, the small scar at the corner of her mouth that she seemed unconscious of touching when nervous. Everything about her demeanor spoke of truth, yet Whitmore was one of the most influential men in town. "I have to conduct a proper investigation, Miss Hartwell. Whitmore is making quite a fuss about this. Says it was near $50. Elena's face paled. $50 was more money than she made in 3 months as the town's librarian and seamstress. "I understand you have to do your job, Sheriff, but I give you my word, I didn't take Mr. Whitmore's money." The library door burst open, bringing with it a gust of cold air and 8-year-old Lucy Chen. The small girl had straight black hair that perpetually escaped her braids and clothes that were always slightly too large for her tiny frame. She was the orphaned daughter of a Chinese immigrant who died building the railroad, and most of the town treated her as invisible, except for Eleanor. "Miss Eleanor!" Lucy called out, then stopped short when she saw Tom. Her dark eyes grew wide with fear. "It's all right, Lucy," Elena said gently, moving toward the child with natural maternal instinct. "Sheriff Sullivan was just leaving." Tom watched the interaction with interest. Elena's entire demeanor changed around the child, softer, more open, protective. Lucy immediately moved to Elena's side, and Elena's hand came up to smooth the girl's unruly hair. "Miss Elena reads to me every day," Lucy announced to Tom with the directness of childhood. "She's the nicest lady in the whole town. She would never steal anything." "I'm sure she is very nice, Lucy," Tom replied kindly. Despite the circumstances, he found himself smiling at the girl's fierce loyalty. Elena's cheeks flushed slightly at the praise, but she kept her focus on Lucy. "Why don't you pick out a book for today while I finish talking with the sheriff?" As Lucy scampered toward the children's corner, Tom stepped closer to Elena. He caught a faint scent of lavender soap and noticed the way she immediately stepped back to maintain distance. "Miss Hartwell, I'll be honest with you. I don't think you're capable of theft, but I have to follow through on this. Whitmore is demanding a search of your room at the boarding house." Elena's breath caught. "My room? But Sheriff, I know it's an invasion of your privacy, ma'am, and I apologize for that. But if we can clear this up quickly, maybe we can put an end to Whitmore's accusations before they spread further." Through the library window, Tom could see a small crowd gathering outside Whitmore's bank across the street. The banker himself stood on the wooden sidewalk, gesturing animatedly to anyone who would listen. Tom's jaw tightened. He'd seen what false accusations could do to someone's reputation in a small town. "When?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This afternoon, if that's all right. I'll try to be discreet about it." Elena nodded, wrapping her arms around herself protectively. "I'll be there." As Tom headed toward the door, he paused. "Miss Hartwell, for what it's worth, I believe you." After he left, Eleanor sank into the wooden chair behind the library's small desk, her hands trembling slightly. Lucy appeared at her elbow with a worn copy of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. "Miss Elena, why did the sheriff say someone thinks you took something?" Elena pulled the child closer, finding comfort in her innocent warmth. "Sometimes people make mistakes, Lucy. Sometimes they think someone did something wrong when they didn't." But you would never steal," Lucy said with absolute certainty. "You give me food from your own lunch every day. You mended my dress when it tore. Mean people don't do nice things like that." Elena's eyes filled with tears at the child's simple faith in her. If only the rest of the town could see her through Lucy's eyes, not as a scarred stranger to be whispered about, but as someone worthy of trust and kindness. Outside, the December wind continued to howl, and Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this accusation was only the beginning of a storm that would test everything she'd tried to build in Desert Springs. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the main street of Desert Springs as Tom approached Maggie O'Brien's boarding house. The two-story wooden structure was painted a cheerful yellow that stood out against the desert landscape, with green shutters that Maggie insisted on keeping despite the harsh climate. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth against the bitter December cold. Maggie herself answered Tom's knock, her graying red hair escaping its pins as usual, her green eyes bright with curiosity and concern. "Sheriff Sullivan, come in out of that wind before you freeze solid," she said in her lilting Irish accent, ushering him into the warm parlour. "I suppose you're here about Eleanor." "Word travels fast, Mrs. O'Brien," Maggie snorted. "In a town this size? Whitmore's been squawking like a wet hen all morning. Half the town knows about his accusations by now." She lowered her voice and moved closer. "And I'll tell you right now, Sheriff, that man is wrong, as wrong can be. Elena Hartwell wouldn't steal a penny if she was starving." Tom removed his hat and set it on the small table by the door. "I tend to agree with you, ma'am, but I still need to conduct a proper search. Where is Miss Hartwell now?" "In her room, poor dear. She's been up there since she came back from the library, barely touched her lunch. This whole business has her terrified, though she's trying not to show it." "Terrified?" Tom's brow furrowed. "It's just a search. If she's innocent—" "Sheriff," Maggie interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "Elena's been through enough troubles in her life. She came to Desert Springs looking for peace, and now this happens." She paused, studying Tom's face. "You're a good man, Tom Sullivan. I've seen how fair you are with folks, but that girl upstairs, she's fragile in ways that don't show on the surface." Before Tom could respond, footsteps sounded on the wooden staircase. Elena descended slowly, her hand gripping the banister tightly. She'd changed into a deep green dress with long sleeves and a high neckline, every inch of skin covered except for her face and hands. Her hair was still pulled back severely, and Tom noticed she kept her right arm close to her body. "Sheriff," she said quietly, "I'm ready." Tom was struck by her composure despite the obvious distress in her dark eyes. "Miss Hartwell, I want you to know this is just a formality. I'm required to be thorough." Elena nodded and turned to lead the way upstairs. Maggie caught Tom's arm as he started to follow. "Be gentle with her, Sheriff," she whispered. "Please." Elena's room was small, but impeccably tidy. A narrow bed with a handmade quilt sat against one wall, a simple wooden dresser against another. A small table by the window served as a desk, with sewing materials neatly organized in a basket beside it. The only personal touches were a few books stacked on the bedside table and a small silver locket on the dresser. "I'll try to make this as quick as possible," Tom said, genuinely uncomfortable with invading her private space. Elena stood by the window, her back to him, arms wrapped around herself. "Do whatever you need to do." Tom began his search methodically but respectfully, checking the dresser drawers without disturbing her carefully folded belongings. He noticed that all her clothing had long sleeves, even her nightgowns. When he moved to the small wardrobe, he found more of the same, dresses, shawls, and coats, all designed to cover as much skin as possible. "Miss Hartwell," he said gently, "may I ask why you came to Desert Springs?" Eleanor was quiet for so long that Tom thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I needed a place where no one knew me, where I could start over." "Start over from what?" Another long pause. "From a life that ended in San Francisco 2 years ago." Tom found himself wanting to know more, but he sensed her fragility and didn't push. As he continued his search, checking behind books and under the mattress, he found himself hoping desperately that he wouldn't find Whitmore's missing money. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. "Elena, dear," Maggie's voice called. "Dr. Hayes is here, says he needs to speak with the sheriff." Tom opened the door to find Dr. Benjamin Hayes in the hallway, his black medical bag in hand and his round spectacles reflecting the lamplight. "Tom, I apologize for the interruption, but I thought you should know. I was treating Mrs. Patterson's rheumatism this afternoon, and she mentioned something interesting about last night's church social." Elena turned from the window, hope flickering in her eyes. "What did she say, Doc?" "She saw Samuel Whitmore at the social, all right, but she also saw him drinking heavily from a flask he kept in his coat pocket. By the end of the evening he could barely walk straight. Mrs. Patterson said she was surprised he made it home safely." Tom's expression grew thoughtful. "Are you saying Whitmore might have been too drunk to know if he really lost money, or where?" "I'm saying Samuel Whitmore has been known to gamble away more money than he cares to admit to his wife, and when he's been drinking, his memory isn't exactly reliable." Eleanor sank onto the edge of her bed, relief and exhaustion overwhelming her simultaneously. "There's something else," Dr. Hayes continued. "Young Lucy Chen came to my office this afternoon. She was worried about Miss Hartwell and wanted to tell me something. She said she saw Mr. Whitmore drop his wallet outside the church last night when he was stumbling to his horse. She tried to tell him, but he was too drunk to listen." Tom completed his search of the room, finding nothing suspicious. As he'd expected from the beginning, Eleanor was innocent. "Miss Hartwell," he said formally, "I found no evidence to support Mr. Whitmore's accusation. As far as I'm concerned, this matter is closed." Elena looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Sheriff. Don't thank me yet. I still need to confront Whitmore about this, and he's not going to be happy about being wrong." Tom paused at the doorway. "Miss Hartwell, if I may ask, why didn't you defend yourself more strongly when I first questioned you? Most people would have been angrier about being falsely accused." Elena's hand moved unconsciously to the small scar at the corner of her mouth. "I've learned that sometimes it's better to let people think what they're going to think anyway." The sadness in her voice struck Tom like a physical blow. As he headed downstairs with Dr. Hayes, he found himself wondering what had happened to Elena Hartwell in San Francisco and why she seemed to expect the worst from everyone around her. Outside, the December wind had died down, but storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. Tom had the distinct feeling that clearing Elena of theft charges was only the beginning of a much more complicated situation. 3 days after the theft accusations were dropped, a fierce winter storm hit Desert Springs. Snow fell heavily, covering the desert town in an unusual blanket of white that transformed the familiar landscape into something magical and strange. The wind howled around the buildings, rattling windows and doors, keeping most residents safely indoors. Tom made his rounds despite the weather, checking on the elderly residents and making sure the main street businesses were secure. As he passed the library, he noticed a faint glow coming from inside. Concerned that someone might have left a lamp burning dangerously, he tried the door and found it unlocked. Inside, he discovered Elena seated at the small reading table with Lucy Chen, both of them wrapped in heavy shawls. Elena was reading aloud from a book of fairy tales, while Lucy listened with rapt attention, occasionally sipping from a cup of what smelled like hot cocoa. "Sheriff!" Lucy called out when she saw him. "Miss Elena made cocoa on the little stove in the back room. Do you want some? It's really warm and good." Tom couldn't help smiling at the child's enthusiasm. "That sounds wonderful, Lucy, but I should ask, Miss Hartwell, should you two be here during the storm? The boarding house would be much warmer." Elena looked up from the book, and Tom was struck by how the lamplight softened her features. "Mrs. O'Brien had to go help her sister whose roof is leaking, and Lucy was alone in the room above the general store. I thought she'd be safer here with me until the storm passes. Miss Elena takes care of me," Lucy added matter-of-factly. "When I'm scared or cold or hungry, she always helps." Tom felt something tighten in his chest at the simple devotion in the child's voice. "Well, in that case, I'd be honored to accept some cocoa." Elena rose gracefully to prepare another cup, and Tom noticed how she moved with unconscious elegance despite her apparent efforts to remain unremarkable. When she returned with the steaming mug, their fingers brushed briefly as he took it, and he felt her tense and pull away. "Thank you," he said quietly, settling into the chair across from them. "What story are you reading?" "Beauty and the Beast," Lucy announced. "It's my favorite. Beauty is really nice to the Beast even though he looks scary, and then he turns into a handsome prince because she loves him." Tom's eyes met Elena's over the child's head, and he saw something flicker across her expression. Pain, perhaps, or longing. "That's a fine story," Tom agreed. "Though I've always thought the Beast was lucky to find someone who could see past his appearance to who he really was inside." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she closed the book. "I should get Lucy back to her room now. The storm seems to be letting up." But even as she said it, a particularly violent gust of wind shook the building, and Lucy pressed closer to Elena's side. "Maybe we should wait a little longer," Tom suggested gently. "I can escort you both to the boarding house when it's truly safe." As if in response to his words, they heard a loud crack from outside, followed by a crash. Tom immediately went to the window and peered out into the swirling snow. "Tree branch came down across the street," he reported. "Looks like we're going to be here for a while longer." Eleanor seemed to shrink into herself at this news, but Lucy clapped her hands excitedly. "It's like an adventure. We're snowed in together." Tom found himself studying Elena's profile in the lamplight as she attempted to smile for Lucy's sake. The small scar at the corner of her mouth was more visible now, and he noticed how she kept her right arm carefully positioned. "Miss Hartwell," he said carefully, "Lucy mentioned that you've been very kind to her. That can't be easy, taking care of a child when you're managing on your own." "Lucy isn't a burden," Elena replied firmly, the first flash of real emotion he'd seen from her. "She's a sweet girl who deserves better than being ignored by this town. I wasn't suggesting she was a burden. I was admiring your kindness." Elena's cheeks flushed. "I'm not particularly kind, Sheriff. I know what it's like to feel unwanted." The admission hung in the air between them. Lucy had curled up against Elena's side and was beginning to doze from the warmth and cocoa. I find that hard to believe, Tom said quietly. You seem like exactly the kind of person anyone would want in their life. Elena's laugh was bitter and soft. You don't know me, Sheriff Sullivan. If you did, you wouldn't say such things. Then tell me. The words came out before Tom could stop them, more intense than he'd intended. Elena looked up at him with startled eyes. Tell me who you are, Elena. Tell me why you came here, why you hide from everyone, why you seem to think you don't deserve the same happiness as anyone else. For a long moment, the only sounds were Lucy's gentle breathing and the wind outside. Then, Elena carefully shifted the sleeping child to rest more comfortably and began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. I was a school teacher in San Francisco. I lived with my parents and my younger sister in a house near the bay. We were happy, ordinary but happy. She paused, her fingers unconsciously tracing the scar at her mouth. 2 years ago there was a fire. It started in the middle of the night, spread so quickly. Tom felt his chest constrict as he began to understand. I tried to get everyone out. I got my sister to the window first, told her to climb down the trellis. Then I went back for my parents. Elena's voice broke slightly. But the ceiling collapsed. By the time the neighbors pulled me out, it was too late for them. And I was... She gestured vaguely to her right arm, still hidden beneath the long sleeve of her dress. The burns healed mostly, but the scars... She shook her head. People in San Francisco knew me before. They remembered the pretty schoolteacher, and now all they could see were the marks the fire left behind. Children would stare, adults would whisper. I couldn't bear the pity, or worse, the disgust. Tom's heart ached for her pain. So you came here to start over. I came here to disappear, to live quietly, where no one would have to look at me and remember what I used to be. She finally met his eyes. I never expected accusations of theft, but in a way, it proved what I already knew. I don't belong anywhere, not really. People will always find reasons to suspect the worst of someone like me. Someone like you? Tom's voice was rougher than usual. Elena, you're one of the kindest, most genuine people I've ever met. The way you care for Lucy, the way you've tried to build a life here despite your grief, that takes incredible strength. Eleanor shook her head. You don't understand. I'm damaged, Sheriff, scarred in ways that will never heal. No one could ever... She stopped herself, but Tom heard the words she didn't say. No one could ever what, Elena? She looked down at Lucy's sleeping form, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. No one could ever love me, she whispered so softly he almost didn't hear her. Not like this, not knowing what I look like underneath these long sleeves and high collars. The raw pain in her voice broke something open in Tom's chest. Without thinking, he moved from his chair to kneel beside hers, his hands gently covering hers where they rested on Lucy's small back. Elena, look at me. She shook her head, unable to meet his eyes. Please, look at me. Finally, reluctantly, she raised her tear-filled gaze to his. You're wrong, he said simply. You're completely wrong. Before she could protest, Tom gently lifted one of her hands to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her palm. Then, with infinite tenderness, he reached for the sleeve of her right arm. May I? Elena's breath caught, panic flashing in her eyes. No, you don't want to see... I want to see all of you, Elena, every part of who you are. With trembling fingers, she slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing the burn scars that traced across her forearm like a map of old pain. The skin was paler in some places, slightly raised in others, but Tom saw only the arm of the woman who cared for orphaned children and brought warmth to a small desert library. Without hesitation, he brought her scarred arm to his lips and pressed gentle kisses along the damaged skin. Beautiful, he whispered against her scars. You're beautiful, Eleanor. Every part of you. Elena broke down completely then, her carefully maintained composure crumbling as Tom gathered her and Lucy both into his arms. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to calm, but inside the small library, something new and precious was being born between two wounded hearts, learning to trust in love again. "I've been alone, too," Tom murmured into her hair. "I lost my wife 3 years ago. Thought I'd never feel anything for anyone again. But you, Eleanor, you make me want to believe in second chances." As the first rays of dawn began to filter through the library windows, Tom Sullivan held the woman he was falling in love with and the child they would both come to cherish, knowing that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with two people brave enough to show each other their scars. 6 weeks after the storm that changed everything, Desert Springs was experiencing an unusually mild February morning. The harsh winter had given way to crisp, clear days that reminded everyone why people chose to build lives in the high desert. Elena stood in the doorway of the library, watching as Tom helped Lucy practice her reading on the wooden bench outside. The sight still made her heart flutter. This good man who had not only accepted her scars, but seemed to treasure every imperfection as part of her story. Their courtship had been the talk of the town, though most of the gossip was kind. Maggie O'Brien had taken full credit for knowing they were perfect for each other from the start, and even some of the more reserved townspeople had warmed to Elena once they saw how devoted Tom was to her and how naturally she cared for Lucy, who had essentially become their unofficial daughter. "Miss Eleanor," Lucy called out, waving a letter in the air. "The mail came. Mr. Peterson said this one's for you, and it's from far away." Eleanor's smile faltered as she recognized the formal script on the envelope. The return address made her stomach drop. Whitmore and Associates Legal Office, San Francisco, California. Tom noticed her sudden pallor immediately. "Eleanor, what is it?" With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope and read the contents, her face growing paler with each line. Tom was beside her in an instant, Lucy forgotten, as he wrapped a protective arm around Elena's waist. "It's from Samuel Whitmore's brother," Elena whispered. "He's a lawyer in San Francisco. He says—" She paused, reading again to make sure she understood correctly. "He says Samuel wrote to him about me after the theft accusations. His brother investigated my background and discovered something about my family's property." "What kind of something?" Tom's voice was carefully controlled, but Elena could feel the tension in his body. "My parents' house, the one that burned, it was on valuable land near the bay. After the fire, the city condemned the property and sold it for development, but according to this lawyer, they never had the right to do so. My parents' will left everything to me, which means I'm the rightful owner of land that's now worth—" Eleanor's voice broke. "Over $5,000. Lucy's eyes went wide. In her 8-year-old understanding, $5,000 was more money than existed in the entire world. Tom let out a low whistle. It was enough money to buy half the businesses in Desert Springs, enough to ensure Eleanor never had to worry about financial security again. But he also understood what this meant in terms of choices and consequences. "There's more," Eleanor continued, her voice barely steady. "He says, if I come to San Francisco to pursue the legal claim, he'll represent me. But—" she looked up at Tom with tears in her eyes. "I'd have to leave Desert Springs. The legal proceedings could take months, maybe longer." The three of them stood in silence, the weight of this unexpected development settling over them like a heavy blanket. Tom's mind was racing, but his heart was breaking. He'd found the woman he wanted to spend his life with, and now circumstances were threatening to take her away. $5,000, he said quietly. "Elena, that's your future secured. You could go anywhere, do anything." "I don't want to go anywhere," Elena said fiercely, surprising herself with the intensity of her response. I want to stay here, with you, with Lucy. This is my home now. Nah, but you have to consider what this means, Tom insisted, though every word felt like it was cutting him. That money represents justice for what happened to your family, and it represents freedom, freedom to never have to depend on anyone else again. Eleanor turned to face him fully, her dark green eyes blazing with an emotion he'd rarely seen from her. Anger. Is that what you think I want? To be independent, to not need anyone? She gestured toward the letter. Tom Sullivan, if you think I would choose money over the life we're building together, then you don't know me at all. Eleanor, I'm not saying you should choose money over us. I'm saying you should choose what's best for your future. You are my future. The words came out louder than Eleanor intended, causing several passers-by to look in their direction. She lowered her voice but didn't back down. Don't you understand? For 2 years, I believed I had no future worth having. Then I came here, and I found not just a place to hide, but a reason to hope again. I found you and Lucy and a community that's learned to accept me. Lucy tugged on Elena's skirt, having followed the conversation with the sharp intelligence that adults often underestimated in children. Miss Elena, are you going to go away? She asked, her voice small and frightened. Elena immediately knelt down to Lucy's level, taking the child's hands in hers. No, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. Ah, but the sheriff thinks you should go get the money, Lucy said, looking between them with confusion. Tom crouched down beside them, his heart aching at the fear in Lucy's eyes. I think Miss Elena should do whatever makes her happiest, Lucy. Even if it means staying here, Eleanor interrupted firmly. Tom, I survived that fire for a reason. I survived losing my family, survived the pain and the scars, survived believing I was unlovable. I survived it all so I could end up here with the 2 people who mean everything to me. She stood up and handed Tom the letter. Write back to Mr. Whitmore's brother. Tell him I'm not interested in pursuing the claim. Tell him I've found something worth more than $5,000. I've found home. Tom stared at the letter, then at Elena, then at Lucy, who was watching them both with the intensity of a child who understood that this moment would determine the shape of her world. Are you absolutely certain? He asked. Elena, this is your inheritance, your family's legacy. My family's legacy is love, Elena said simply. They taught me that love means choosing to stay, choosing to fight for what matters, choosing to build something beautiful even after everything seems lost. She reached up and touched the small scar at the corner of her mouth, no longer hiding it. These scars are part of my story, but they're not the end of it. The end of my story is what I choose to write here, with you. Tom felt something shift inside him. A weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying finally lifting. He'd been so afraid of being selfish, of wanting Elena to choose him over financial security, that he'd nearly pushed away the best thing that had ever happened to him. In that case, he said, reaching into his vest pocket and pulling out a small velvet box that made Elena's breath catch. I have something to ask you. Right there on the main street of Desert Springs, with Lucy bouncing excitedly beside them and half the town pretending not to watch from windows and doorways, Tom dropped to one knee. Elena Rose Hartwell, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the desert air, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing you just how beautiful and worthy of love you are? Elena's answer was lost in her tears, but her vigorous nodding and the way she threw her arms around him made her response perfectly clear. Lucy whooped with joy and danced around them in circles, and from various buildings came the sounds of applause and cheerful shouts of congratulation. As Tom slipped the simple gold band with its modest pearl onto Elena's finger, she realized that some treasures couldn't be measured in dollars. The love of a good man, the devotion of a child, the acceptance of a community, these were riches beyond calculation. I love you, Tom Sullivan, she whispered against his ear as he held her close. "And I love you, Elena Hartwell, scars, stories, and all." 2 months later, on a perfect April morning with wildflowers blooming across the desert and the mountains standing sentinel in the distance, Eleanor walked down the aisle of Desert Springs' small wooden church. She wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Maggie had helped her make, with sleeves that came to her wrists but fit close enough to show she was no longer hiding. Her hair was adorned with small white flowers that Lucy had carefully picked and arranged. Tom waited at the altar in his best suit, his badge polished and gleaming, his eyes never leaving Elena's face as she approached. Lucy walked beside Elena as her flower girl, scattering rose petals with solemn importance, proud to be part of their special day. As they exchanged vows before God and the community that had become their family, Elena thought about the letter from San Francisco that now sat in their fireplace, used as kindling for warmth and light. She'd made her choice, and she'd never been more certain of anything in her life. Some love stories begin with fairy tale perfection, but the most beautiful ones begin with two broken people choosing to heal together, finding in each other not just acceptance, but the courage to write a new ending to their stories, one filled with hope, joy, and the kind of love that sees scars as proof of survival rather than reasons for shame.